Good afternoon, everyone.
This is WIUR Radio.
Live here from WIUR Radio in New Rochelle, as you heard by that little liner, testing something out there. Ah, man, yesterday, yesterday as a Yankee fan was rough, but we got a lot to get into. Even joined by a guest today. Going to introduce him in just a second. Um, the Yankees versus the Red Sox last night. Not how you want things to go if you're a Yankee fan. I think as the game progressed, even though they were up 1-0, started to see more and more ways they could lose. Game 2 tonight, Rodon taking on Bayo. The Mets, got to talk about the crosstown rival New York Mets. Hearing I was the little brother all season. They have a disappointing end to their season. How should Mets fans feel going forward? Going to discuss that. The Jets have had 4 games now with head coach Aaron Glenn. How's Glenn doing over there? And has he done enough to change the culture for the Jets? The Giants beat the Chargers in Jackson Dart's first game. Huge performance from Dart and Scattaboo. And uh, conversation I thought I had touched on enough my first show this semester, but the season's over now. So who is the MVP? So now introducing my guest, Christian Montano, one half of the Beyond the Bench podcast. Christian, where are you at?
Thank you for having me. I'm so happy to be here. I'm excited.
I'm very excited to have you, Christian. Always a pleasure talking with you. So last night, that's the first topic I really want to dive into because I think it's the biggest story. I thought we were going to lead things off with Jackson Dart, but the Yankees had other plans for us today. The Yankees, they jumped ahead early with Anthony Volpe homering in the second, but as is the case a lot this season, a lot last playoffs, the bullpen blows that game. Luke Weaver comes in, doesn't have a great history with Rafaela, walks him, then gives up a single to the 9 batter that is stretched into a double because of Aaron Judge's arm. And in the ninth, Chapman's able to secure that, even though the Yankees had the bases loaded. Yankees as a whole were 1 for 7 in those spots. Christian, I want to ask you, what is the key to the Yankees winning this series?
Honestly, it looks like it's going to be pitching. Pitching is what messed it up last night, in my opinion, and the formation of the lineup. I think that Rice should have been put in at some point during that game just to try him out because clearly nothing was working. So I don't know why he didn't put him in at some point.
It's funny you mentioned Ben Rice because I was doing a lot of digging into Rice's numbers. Rice in late inning pressure situations, which probably, I think that bases loaded in the ninth situation would have counted as a late pressure situation
Absolutely.
for Rice. 54 at bats. He owns a 932 OPS with 5 home runs and 9 RBIs. Do you think Rice, I keep thinking to myself, like, did Aaron Boone really think like Rice didn't want to play in that game or wasn't ready to play in that game when he is a Yankee fan, born and raised in Massachusetts? I think he would have affected that game. You think Rice would have been able to make an impact there with the bases loaded?
Absolutely. I think Grisham was not having a good game at that point. I think he was over 3 with 3 strikeouts. At that, you have to give Rice a shot in that situation because clearly Grisham wasn't working out that game. So you got to throw Rice in there to at least do something different.
Yeah, I think the Yankees had a lot of trouble adapting to Garrett Crochet. I was listening to the game on the radio broadcast for about until the 5th or 6th inning, and Sims was talking about how they had a really good approach at first. They swung early in counts, got on top of Crochet. He had trouble with the fastball in the first inning. Left 2 over the plate. Goldschmidt and Judge get a single early in counts, but they're not able to capitalize on that. And I think a lot of that has to do with adjustments. Timely hitting is a key I have here. I have 4 keys to the game or the series that I think I really want to dive into. And the first one being timely hitting. you can't expect solo shots to win you a playoff game. I feel like that's an issue a lot with the Yankees. They hit home runs, but a lot of them aren't in high pressure situations. And going back on Ben Rice, that would have been a huge situation for him because he does thrive in those high pressure situations. Leaving the bases loaded there, I read that was the first time in playoff history a team had bases loaded, no outs in the ninth inning and not scored a run. So that right there, that's history, but it's not the type of history you want to be making if you're the New York Yankees. So that's disappointing as is. And then you add on top of that, I think we need to see Aaron Judge be MVP Aaron Judge this season. Yesterday, he did a good job of getting on base, but two singles in four at bats is not what you're looking for from Aaron Judge. You're looking for those big hits, those home runs, those doubles, the extra base hits that can immediately get runners either into scoring position or even scoring off of a home run. Aaron Judge, everyone knows his playoff struggles, batting 210 with 47 hits, 16 home runs, 34 RBIs, and 37 runs scored across 59 games in his postseason career. A huge story last year was Judge not being able to come through in those big moments. And it looks like it's an issue not only from Judge, but from the whole team. But when you're the captain of the team, when you're the three or about to be or should be four-time MVP, if you count 2017, as a lot of people do. And then I wanted to talk about the pitching a little bit, which you touched on. The length from starters is something that the Yankees need to see because that bullpen has been so detrimental in the postseason and even across the regular season this year. We saw the bullpen cost countless games. Um, a reliable bullpen is something we really need to see. They gave up all three runs last night. You walked three batters compared to two strikeouts. As a reliever, you're expected to be a guy that can strike out at a very high rate. And two strikeouts across three and two thirds from the bullpen is definitely not what you want to see. And you're not going to be successful when you give away those free passes there. So that's kind of my keys to that game. Is there anything you want to add on that, Christian?
I think the Weaver situation, I think honestly what it was is we knew Weaver wasn't he hasn't been on he hasn't really had his stuff this season. And I think knowing his history with Rafael, as you said before, and I think that this decision was made by Boone before the game that once Fried is done, Weaver's going to come in no matter the situation. And I think that Boone does that a lot, and I don't think that's good for the team, honestly.
I was actually talking with a Dodgers fan about that. That's similar to what Dave Roberts does, but because that offense is so lethal, it hasn't really
Hmm.
been biting them now. But we saw in playoffs past, 2017, they come short of the World Series to the Astros, and a lot of that was because of missed bullpen management. And I think it's a lot of, like you said, predetermined decisions that are really biting the Yankees. You have the 8 and the 9 batter. I think you try with Fried at least for one more batter, seeing what he can do. Um, that being said, watching him, I did see he was losing a bit of what he had last night when they did pull him, but I think he had one or two more outs left in him. Um, moving on, the Aaron Boone constantly, I think, overthinks and underthinks at the same time. It kind of like it's two bad things there. But Jazz, I'm really upset with how things went with Jazz Chisholm last night. He comes into the game late as a defensive replacement. Some people are arguing if that was even the right time to bring him in. I don't think there was necessarily a right time to bring him in because both pitchers were elite left-handers in Crochet and Chapman. But you saw Jazz after that game. He's turning his back to reporters Do you think that Aaron Boone overthanked the lineup in game one and the decisions he made?
Absolutely. Um, so I saw something about Ahmed Rosario hits Crochet very well, and I don't think he did anything last night. I think it was
No.
more so just he looks into the stats and he's like, okay, let's just do this because this is what I see. Even though you don't like, you have to put your best players in. There were 57 home runs between the two guys on the bench last night. That's unacceptable.
It's very unacceptable if you ask me. I can't believe Ben Ray sat on the bench that whole game. And another thing that really bothered me was Jose Caballero getting that at bat against Aroldis Chapman. I do not care if Caballero is a righty and Chapman's a lefty. I would much rather have Ben Rice up in that situation. Caballero is 1 for his last 10, dating back to his last hit being on September 23rd against the White Sox. I mentioned Rice with late inning pressure is a massive threat to any opponent. It doesn't matter if it's Aroldis Chapman. Ben Rice has had a walk-off grand slam his rookie season against the Orioles and just had another grand slam just a few months ago. That's I think that's something that you have to take into account there. Like, he does have success with bases loaded. I think it was something like a 272 batting average with two home runs and OPS approaching 900 with the bases loaded. So if Aaron Boone is looking so much into these stats, I think he would have had to see Ben Rice with the bases loaded is a great option there. And you know, you mentioned Ahmed Rosario having success against Crochet. Yeah, I think it was 6 for 9. You're
Mhm.
judging something in
Yep,
the playoffs off of 9 at bats. Do you think that's a big enough sample size to really make that big of a judgment on?
absolutely not. And I want to go back to your Caballero point. Chapman did not look like he had his stuff going in the beginning of that ninth inning. And then once Stanton struck out, but Stanton had a relatively productive at bat. I think he got a full count on him. But I feel like once he saw Caballero came up, he kind of settled down and it was over from there. He started throwing 100 again. It was over from there. You need a better hitter in that situation.
Yeah, I think, once the broadcast mentioned it too on ESPN last night. Chapman did himself a huge favor by striking out Giancarlo Stanton. Stanton's someone with a multitude of playoff success. It was a game very unlike playoff Giancarlo Stanton last night. And if I were a betting man, which I'm not, Giancarlo Stanton would be someone I would expect to have a monster game tonight because of his performance last night. Pulling up Giancarlo Stanton's playoff numbers now. This I don't know why I didn't have him in my notes. I probably should have. Across his postseason, all with the Yankees because he never made it in Miami. He's batting 258, 18 home runs across 42 games. He has an OPS of 969. Like, those are some great numbers there. I think Giancarlo Stanton's someone we're gonna see get going here tonight. Um, Facing someone like Crochet is hard, no matter if Stanton is, historically bats really well against lefties. I was definitely expecting him to do a lot more. I think a lot of Yankees fans were, you know, Giancarlo Stanton definitely someone I see getting going tonight, but someone that has already gotten going is Anthony Volpe. He had a home run, he got on base, shook up Aroldis Chapman last night. What do you think a good playoff performance, or do you think a good playoff performance saves Anthony Volpe's tenure in New York?
Um, I think it depends on how far the Yankees go, obviously. But I also think that what's really going to save Volpe is if Boone comes back after this season, because Aaron Boone clearly did not want to sit Volpe ever. we saw it a little bit at the end of the year, but I think that was more of a to please not to please the fans, but just to kind of get people off his back. Um, but I think if the Yankees do make it far and he has a very good postseason, I think that at least buys him a little more time in the Bronx.
Well, mentioning Aaron Boone's someone I see as on the hot seat now. He was kind of like dabbling with it, like like he was like slightly touching it, and then now I think he's starting to feel the heat there after dropping game one. The Braves just fired their manager, who's had enormous success there. Obviously, not the things you wanted these past 2 seasons, not making the playoffs, being under 500 this season. But he brought a Braves team without Ronald Acuna Jr. to winning a World Series championship. When you see something like that, Christian, does that make you question even more how Aaron Boone is still the Yankees manager?
I've been questioning that for probably at least the last 3 years. Even last year, I couldn't even believe it's because of the team he has. And I see people say it all the time. If he was the manager of the Red Sox, even they would probably not even be in the playoffs. It's the team he has around him that's letting him keep his job.
Yeah, I think the Yankees have done everything to give Aaron Boone the team he needs to succeed on the field. This trade deadline was one I think most fans received positively. Acquiring Camilo Doval, acquiring Jake Bird, who I don't think made the playoff roster. I might be
No, I don't
wrong.
think so.
Um, and obviously David Bednar, who's stepped into that closer role with both Weaver and Williams struggling. Coming into this season, you obviously don't expect Devin Williams, the guy that's been probably the best closer in baseball the past 3 years, to regress this much. But Brian Cashman went out there anyway and acquired two players that could have stepped into the closer role. One did in David Bednar, and that should have taken some stress off of guys like Weaver and Williams. Williams, I'll give him credit. I think he pitched pretty well last night. If I'm not mistaken, he might have given up, or was that Cruz gave up the one run?
I think it was Bednar that gave up the run because
It
it was
was
in the top of the
Bednar.
ninth. Yeah,
Yes, it was Bednar. So, Williams has been pitching a lot better as of late. Um, but this is something, it goes back to, I think Boone has predetermined arms, like you said, that he wants to get into games. Like he has a game plan mapped out. Baseball's not necessarily a sport where you can do that. You might have an idea in your head of, okay, these are 5 arms I want to pitch today. Let's say he had in mind he wanted Weaver, Cruz, Williams, and Bednar to pitch yesterday. First of all, I don't think any manager wants 4 high leverage bullpen arms going. Look at the Red Sox, only had to go to their closer after Crochet. Um, but you use those 4 high leverage arms. And it's you're probably going to see some repercussions of that tonight unless some other arms can pick up the slack. Actually, they used 5. They used Tim Hill as well. I forgot about that at the very end of the
yeah.
game. They used Tim Hill. Um, like there is no world where you should be having to use both of your setup men and your closer and lose the game. I just don't understand how that happens, and I really don't think many people can either. But going back to Anthony Volpe, because I strayed off topic a bit, and I did want to talk about this from my point of view. Anthony Volpe is someone that's been beleaguered by Yankees fans. I think it let up a little bit when it came out that Volpe has been playing hurt a lot of the year, because you have to give some people credit when they play hurt. This is a sports environment where not many star players will play hurt. Not many players will play hurt, period, no matter the skill level. And Anthony Volpe did that because the Yankees didn't really have another option. But I question, once they got Caballero, maybe giving Volpe a little bit more rest. They sat him probably one week in total this year. If Volpe was really that hurt, I don't understand where you're coming from a team standpoint, as a team that has a history of taking those extra precautions when it comes to injuries. Putting Aaron Judge on the injured list as soon as they saw his elbow was hurt is one case that stands out. They're constantly placing players on the injured list that are borderline, and if this injury from Volpe was that serious, I question why they didn't sit him longer. But, last night his performance really stuck out to me. I don't even think the home run sticks out the most. I think the thing that sticks out the most to me was him dancing around at first base, getting Chapman to throw over 3 times. I don't think I've seen that since the pitch clock has been
I haven't
implemented.
either. Yeah.
And it was really, interesting to see, and seeing how he can be a threat on the base paths, as well as, invigorate the team with a home run. I really thought that home run could have been a turning point for the Yankees, but they didn't take advantage of it. Um, it just makes you question, that the energy, the culture that clubhouse is having. And when I saw what happened with Jazz after the game, Jazz is someone I've followed since the minor leagues. A great young talent. He could have played shortstop. He could have played third, but they chose not to. And I don't know. There are a lot of ways you could have realigned that infield, but this is about Volpe. I keep going off on a tangent because of how mad I am about last night. Um, but yeah, Volpe, a big playoff for Volpe. I texted my dad, who I think is the number one Anthony Volpe supporter. Like,
Yep.
he's ride or die Anthony Volpe, and
Absolutely.
I said, what would a big playoff performance mean for Anthony Volpe? And he said everything. And then I texted Keith, and I said, Keith, I said, what would a big playoff mean for Anthony Volpe? And he said, silence from the haters. And I think, this a lot of this negative energy we see affect players in New York, especially. I would say Gary Sanchez was someone the fans unfairly picked on, and we saw that affect his play. Gary Sanchez, when he came up, was such a threat, and we see him still around the league. He had a decent year, last year and the year prior. I'm not quite sure exactly how he did, but I know it wasn't bad. Like, the fact that he's still around the league and still mingling around a starter spot shows me that he did have the skill in him to succeed in New York. But I think that, bad energy affected him. And Glaber Torres, another guy, I feel like the fans ran out of town. When he struggled that one year, he batted like 270, but he only had like 5 home runs. Fans really got on him for that. And then the next year, we saw his average dip tremendously. Yes, the power numbers went up, but he wasn't nearly the player he even was the year before. And, you see what the fans say really gets into the players' heads. And I think Yankee fans have to be a little bit more gracious when it comes to that, especially. Um, Definitely a little unfair hate with Anthony Volpe. Anything else you want to add on that before we switch topics?
No, I think you said most of it for Volpe. I think he has to have a good postseason to keep a spot on the team.
All right. So I have an announcement to make. Uh, this is one of 3 announcements I will be making this show, just so you guys know. Shout out to our next show of the week, Beyond the Scoreboard. Make sure to check out their show every Tuesday at 11, only on WIUR Radio. Congratulations, guys. I know how much that means as someone that's won show of the week in the past. It's really an honor to see everyone here at the station thinks so highly of you. Keep up the good work, guys. All right. So moving on to our next topic. Our yeah, our next topic. The Mets, they ended their season 83-79 after they landed Juan Soto. Everyone was putting them as the World Series favorite going into this year. Steve Cohen gave the Mets a 5-year window when he took over in 2020. what does it mean with no championships to show in those 5 years that Steve Cohen gave the Mets?
Um, I would if I was a Mets fan, which I'm not, I would be extremely disappointed in my team. Like, I can't believe that this is even happening. I thought they would have a World Series by now.
I definitely thought they would have a World Series within 5 years when I saw the way that Steve Cohen was throwing around money, inflating the pitching market by giving those large contracts to both Verlander and Scherzer when he took over. But since 2020, the Mets' combined regular season and playoff record has been a whopping 456 and 424. That is nowhere near the level of play you thought you'd be getting from this Mets team. You know, they had some good runs. 2022, they made it to the playoffs after winning 101 games and then eventually lost in the wild card round to the Padres, who won a boatload less games, if I remember correctly. Um, and then, they missed the playoffs in 2023 with a payroll over 300 million. And then they bounced back last year. Everyone's calling them the next version of the Miracle Mets. And uh, now in 2025, you missed the playoffs. You're barely above 500, winning 84 games. This is really disappointing to see as someone that, would have welcomed, I think, some more competition in New York, especially. Like this market is so massive. And I feel like anyone in New York, at least everyone tunes in for a Subway Series matchup. So it's always in the back of everyone's head. Um, I think this is a sad day for Mets fans because they have to admit they owe me an apology, okay? They really owe me an apology for saying money buys championships my whole life and not having anything to show for it in 5 years. They also got to apologize for calling us little brother this whole year. That was disgraceful. You think Mets fans owe us an apology, Christian?
Absolutely.
Uh,
They looked awful this year. Like, I keep saying I cannot believe this even happened to them with the team that they had.
The team that they had was so good, and I think the problem with them was, you didn't manage the young talent you had, right? You had so many young arms you could have called up earlier. You could have called up Tong earlier in the season. You could have called up Spratt earlier in the season, and there's another one I'm missing up
Nolan
there.
McLean,
Yes, Nolan
he
McLean.
looked amazing this year.
Yeah, that's a guy that looked incredible. Could have maybe even been your guys' ace, but I don't know where the urgency was to call these arms up, especially when you saw that your rotation wasn't cutting it. And a lot of that landed on the bullpen, which I want to touch on another question. But moving on, uh, what would letting go of Pete Alonso mean for the Mets?
So I personally don't think I think he's going to re-sign with them. I think he's just doing this as a money grab to try and get more money because, as we all know, Steve Cohen has a lot of money. But if they lose him, that's just going to make them worse. Like, he was probably after Juan Soto the biggest bright spot on that team this year, and they still only had 83 wins with three people on that team who were MVP candidates at some point in their career in Soto, Alonso, and Lindor. It's just Pete Alonso would losing Pete Alonso would be detrimental to them.
Yeah, I mean, I talk about how Pete Alonso really made a generation of Mets fans. When you went to City Field, I think the past 7 years he's been there, a majority of the jerseys would be Pete Alonso jerseys. He's a very likable guy. He's a guy when he was a free agent this past offseason. I really wanted the Yankees to give a shot and go get him, but it wasn't in their plans. Um, he's your franchise home run leader, past Daryl Strawberry, got his 264th home run this year, passing Strawberry's 252. So now he leads that margin by a bit, by 12 home runs. Um, I would guarantee Juan Soto, if Pete Alonso doesn't stay, breaks that record. And in 4 of the 6 seasons since I felt like I wanted to take away 2020 because 2020 is such a weird year. Um, Over 100 RBIs in 4 out of those 6 seasons. He led the league in RBIs in 2022, a huge reason the Mets won 101 games that season. Um, and he's averaged 41 home runs a year since he's been called up, taking out 2020. This is a very impactful bat, and I don't know how you would recover with losing Alonso. I think the only reason I'm even bringing this up is because I feel like Alonso has to feel a little bit of disrespect with the Mets, taking so much time to re-sign him this offseason. Do you think there's any of that disrespect still lingers with Alonso?
I think so. I mean, in his head, since he's been called up, honestly, he's been the guy. Like if you think of the Mets, you think of Pete Alonso, and now that Juan Soto's there, it kind of takes away from that. And I feel like he might be not. I don't want to say jealous, but kind of, I guess, feels disrespected. Judge didn't. Judge didn't feel disrespected when they brought Soto in because he knew that he could back up
Yeah, Judge
his
moved
stats.
Judge moved positions for Juan Soto, and I think that was the reason it hurt so much for Yankees fans this offseason is, Judge welcomed him with open arms, even moving positions when he didn't have to. He was the captain. Um, so I think the last question I want to ask about the Mets is how do the Mets really move forward with a payroll that's already approaching 350 million? Like, where do you go from here?
That's the question everybody's asking. Honestly, I don't know. Like I don't know what they could have done better other than perform better. Now, I understand the bullpen didn't perform the way it did. Their trade deadline acquisition, they got Ryan Helsley, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
He did not look good at all once he arrived to New York. I think the bullpen's the thing they need to work on right now.
Yeah, I definitely think the bullpen is something they need to work on. They're ranked 14th in bullpen ERA with a 3.93, but since June 30th, I think this is something that not enough people are talking about. Mets pitchers have owned an ERA of 5.09. So they started to see it was an issue in late June. They tried to fix it in mid to late July with those trade deadline acquisitions. But the Mets should have thought when you have a starting pitcher like Clay Holmes, who could probably only go 5 innings. He didn't go over 5 innings much this season. It's gonna tax that bullpen a lot, and they should have thought about how that would affect them down the stretch because down the stretch is when bullpens really start to fall apart. And I think it's when we even saw the Yankees bullpen fall apart was, down the stretch, the dog days of summer from late July until, the end of August. And then they picked it back up a bit and then floundered again yesterday. Just not a clear vision as to where the Mets go from here. um, I don't know if I'm gonna touch on the Jets yet because I might not have time. But before we move on, I'm just gonna play a little ad for you guys.
UR Radio.
Hi, this is Anthony Carlo, TV news reporter in New York City and proud alum. If you're looking for a career in media, Iona is the place to be. From internships to real-world experience, Iona's media program is unprecedented. Take it from an industry professional who made it in the biz.
Now back to WIUR, Iona University Radio.
Well, as someone that has been in this media program now almost 2 years, I will say our staff is some of the best. I'm an intern over at Fox Sports now. I don't think any of this would have been possible without the great staff I have here at Iona. So just a little ad for you guys to listen to, maybe pique your interest if you're an up and coming media student. So moving on, probably one of the topics I was most excited to talk about with you, Christian, is the Giants picking up their first win against the Chargers, 21-18. Jackson Dart had he had a passing touchdown and a rushing touchdown. The Giants defense sacked or intercepted Herbert twice. Dexter Lawrence got his first interception. That was probably the height of my day. On offense, Cam Scatterboo continues to be a human wrecking ball. Uh, has your expectations changed for the Giants based on this performance we saw Sunday? Obviously the injury from Malik Neighbors taken into account as well.
Yeah, so through the first 3 weeks before this Chargers game, I had some very strong feelings about the Giants, and they fixed almost every one of my complaints that they could have fixed this past week. You started Jackson Dart, you ran the offense correctly. Jackson Dart's football IQ in this game looked incredible. The touchdown pass he had to Theo Johnson was I didn't even see it coming. I thought he was just going to run it in. Um, and the defense looked good. Even the secondary looked good for a change. And that doesn't happen a lot for the Giants. They really got to Herbert in the first half of that game, and I'm very excited to see what happens now. I think that maybe I'm getting a little ahead of myself here, given how bad the rest of our division has been, other than the Eagles. There's a chance the Giants can sneak into a postseason spot. I'm just gonna say that now.
Yeah, I could honestly see it coming. The Bengals have start. I feel like the Bengals' whole thing is they start like 0-2, 0-3,
Hmm.
like every
Yep.
year, and then eventually make the playoffs. It's
Yeah.
definitely a possibility. Sunday for me was really a roller coaster. I think I texted you. I think I was at my height of my feelings for about 10 minutes. I thought we were
Yep.
so back, and then I saw Malik Neighbors hit the turf, and it all came crashing back down. For me personally, I don't know if my expectations have changed that much, but I did love what I saw from Jackson Dart. He had great mobility. I mentioned the rushing touchdown he had. I think he had great game awareness. He was a great game manager, and that's great from a young guy, someone that's only like 2 years older than I am. So thinking about it that way, the way he's able to lead a team at such a young age was definitely very encouraging. And I think a big thing that has changed is that culture. I loved all the post game content I saw from Scatterboo and from Jackson Dart. Um, that, that being said, I think the Giants finally have their guy. I think Jackson Dart can be the franchise quarterback. I don't know if it's an overreaction from one game. We'll see how he does against the Saints. But touching on a little bit of a sadder topic, with the Malik Neighbors injury, what do you think the Giants do at receiver?
Um, at least for now, Wan'Dale Robinson's going to have to slide into that wide receiver one spot, which we saw him do last year, and he did not look that bad at it. He like he was very good at being the guy, that wide receiver. And the one thing I think is going to have to change is Darius Slayton's going to have to step up into that wide receiver two spot, because now all eyes are going to be on Wan'Dale. Slayton has to get open to get if Wan'Dale's in double coverage, he needs to catch those passes.
Yeah, so Slayton's a guy that frustrates me because he always has like one or two big catches a game, and then I feel like we don't see him the rest of the game.
Yeah.
So in terms of Giants receivers, the one that compares the most to Malik Neighbors' stat line is Wan'Dale Robinson. They have the same amount of receptions at 18, similar receiving yards. Neighbors had 271, and Wan'Dale had 237. That being said, Wan'Dale didn't have the best game even when Malik Neighbors was out of that game. Um, he only had 3 receptions for 14 yards on Sunday. So that was a little bit worrying, but we also saw him have a monster game against the Cowboys, And then behind Wandale, you mentioned Slayton having to step into that wide receiver 2 spot. He has 9 receptions and 135 yards. So he hasn't been doing too bad either. And I think with an upped amount of targets, we could see those numbers go up for Slayton too. Um, Something interesting that got brought up to me yesterday was, with both AJ Brown and Jamar Chase showing some frustrations with their current situations, do you think the Giants give either the Bengals or the Eagles the call? Obviously, the Eagles, the less likely of the two.
I don't think the Bengals would be willing to part ways with Jamar Chase just because of how young he is, how young Joe Burrow is. Um, Maybe T. Higgins, if that's an option. But and I don't even think the Eagles would consider trading AJ Brown to the Giants as much as I think I would want him. I think he performed better with us. I think that the Eagles would need to consider that. I think the likely option is the Giants find a free agent. Isaiah Hodgins is out there who showed the last time the Giants made the playoffs that he could be the
Brian
wide
Dable
receiver
guy.
that they need. Yeah, he's a Dable guy. I've seen people throw out Odell Beckham Jr. I wouldn't be opposed to it, but I would have to kind of take that with a grain of salt. Like, I don't think he can be the wide receiver 1 anymore. But if he's out there and he can take some of the eyes off of Wandale or Slayton, that could be a good thing. And I also wanted to point out, I saw Jackson Dart target the tight ends more than we usually see Giants quarterbacks do.
Makes you think. I wish we still had Darren Waller after seeing what he did for the Dolphins on on Monday. Um, but that leads us to this Sunday, versus Saints, a team that has yet to pick up a win. They played competitive last week. Still were uh, technically blown out. It was a 2-score game. Is Sunday a must win for Jackson Dart and the Giants?
The best way for me to describe this game for the Giants is this game is the definition of a trap game. You beat one of the best teams in the NFL. You look great. Your team's excited. Your fans are excited. You think you're going to be 2-3 after this week because you're playing probably the worst team in the NFL, and they come out and stomp you. And I'm afraid that's what's going to happen to the Giants. And they need to get the mentality of this is still a game that we are not guaranteed to win.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, like you said, after you beat the Chargers, I feel like expectations are so high on Dart. But like he said, pressure is something that all the great players, that they have to thrive under. Um, for a rookie quarterback, I think every game is going to feel like a turning point. A loss here would probably be the worst thing for Giants fans after last week. It would probably just get back to how we were before Dart was announced the starter. People would start to doubt the team, the direction they're going. And any win for, I think, a rookie quarterback, I think adds a little bit of runway or time, for development. And that's something I think is so crucial, especially in the case of Jackson Dart, who, I think the Giants expected to sit on the bench at least a little longer than he did. So any more runway we get for Dart would be a positive. Um, to me, this whole conversation, would have been avoided if the Giants had waited even up until this week to start Jackson Dart. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I do. I think we're not going to see Dart on the bench unless something astronomical happens. I don't think we're going to see him on the bench the rest of the season. Now we obviously saw him. He was favoring his hamstring towards the end of that game, which obviously worries me. But I think he'll be okay. But I think Jackson Dart's the guy from here on out.
All right. So that's what we got on the Giants. Very interesting to see how Dart will play this Sunday. So it looks like we do have time to squeeze the Jets in here. The Jets have had not the best start to the season, but I will say personally, I think they are playing more competitive. They lost 34-32 against the Steelers. they got blown out against the Bills. That wasn't very competitive, but they lost to one of to one of the best teams in the NFC, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They have Baker Mayfield. So anytime you play them, you kind of expect to be blown out with that offense. Evans, Godwin, the rookie. I can't pronounce his name.
Emeka Egbuka. Love him.
Egbuka.
He's so good.
He's so
Yeah.
good. That kid got some talent. He gives me Puka Nakua vibes.
Yeah.
They only lost by 2 to them, and they only lost 27-21 against the Dolphins. But obviously, when you lose to the Dolphins, even by one score, it's like the end of the world. The Jets found a way to out Dolphin. The Dolphins is the way that I'm putting it. So I would say my overall, takeaways from those first 4 games, the turnovers and mistakes have really hurt them, especially in week 2 and 4. But the running game that struggled a bit late last season, we saw Hall not really being Brees Hall. People questioned what he would be able to do this season. I think he's returned to form a little bit here throughout the first 4 games for the Jets. But it hasn't necessarily even been enough to compensate for what they're doing poorly, which is pretty much everything else. Has Aaron Glenn done enough to change the culture of the New York Jets?
I personally think it's too early to say. There's a lot of bright spots, but obviously there's a lot of downsides on this team. I think the defense is one of them. This defense is very weird. I feel like every year people are saying they're either going to be really good or really bad, and there's no in between. So far, they've looked pretty bad. And I think the offense with Justin Fields has looked serviceable enough to take them not far, but take them at least towards the playoff picture if they had a better defense.
Yeah, the defense is always, I think, the conversation with the Jets. I remember when Saleh came in, everyone was very, very happy that they had a defensive-minded head coach, coming in here to a defense that had, they had the pieces. They have Sauce Gardner. He's still one of the most talented players in the league over there on the defensive side of the ball. But not being able to really play to the potential the Jets defense has really been the true story for that Jets defense. Aaron Glenn hasn't done anything to improve that defense whatsoever, in my opinion. Aaron Glenn has really been someone that I don't know how I feel about him. I saw the guy do some sort of weird dance week 3, and it kind of rubbed me the wrong way. And then when I was listening to the fan on the train to work, they were talking about how Glenn and Saleh use a lot of the same terms, like it's not instant coffee. So to me, I'm even wondering if the head coach is even running the team. But then again, the Jets owners couldn't care less about how the Jets do now that they own the soccer team over there in Europe. I don't even think he's living here anymore, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, it's just not. It doesn't look good for the Jets. It hasn't looked good for the Jets in a long time, if I'm being honest. But it seems sad to be a Jets fan.
I think the happiest moment the Jets have had in the past decade was when they traded for Aaron Rodgers.
I think so, honestly.
And that's sad to say because Rodgers ended up not doing anything for the Jets. So I feel like whenever the Jets feel any sign of happiness, the universe has to put that negative spin on it and bring them back down to earth a little bit. So the Jets being the Jets, 0-4. Let's get back to the real topics. Tonight, the New York Yankees, game 2, win or go home against the Red Sox. They were supposed to have an advantage going into this game, you know what? Let's not talk about that yet. This is my fault. I messed up. I'll be honest. The MVP conversation.
Yeah.
Christian. Huge
Yeah.
conversation. I really didn't think I would have to talk about this after my first segment because I thought it was put to bed, but Ben Verlander got me very mad the other day because Ben Verlander, his whole argument in 2022 when Judge broke the record was that it doesn't matter if he breaks the record, he doesn't pitch, and now it doesn't matter what Judge's numbers are because Rayleigh might break the record, and he ended up not even breaking the record, only finishing with 60, you know? So, that just made me mad, anytime Ben Verlander speaks, and then he tried to get on Judge's side during the weekend, but I wanna just put the numbers out there as an A and B situation and give you the choice, player A or player B. So player A, 7.3 WAR across 159 games, uh, 60 home runs, 125 RBIs, 14 stolen bases, a 247 average, an OPS of 948, and an OPS plus of 169. Pretty good. Player B, 9.7 WAR, 179 hits across 152 games. He had an average of 331, an OPS of 1144, and an OPS plus of 215. So just by saying player A or player B, who are you taking?
Aaron Judge, player B, obviously.
Yeah. So I figured you'd be able to get who's who there. Um, what do you think the main argument for Judge winning MVP is in your opinion?
He's the better player, I think, overall. The whole argument is that, Cal Raleigh's a catcher. That shouldn't be the reason he wins MVP because he's a catcher. And also, I saw the stat the other day. I thought this is an interesting stat kind of here. If Cal Raleigh were to win MVP, and I think he may have gotten his average above 250 towards the end of the year. But if he were to win MVP, he would be the 10th player all time to win MVP with a batting average at or below 250. The other 9 were pitchers. That's
kind of crazy. I I don't like the batting average argument so much because I don't like batting average, but
right.
you have to admit Judge batting 330 is absurd and having 50, 54 or 52 home runs this season, being able to do that. And then other people are arguing that, Judge plays in a little league ballpark and his home run numbers wouldn't even be that high. But Judge would have 54 home runs in T-Mobile, 2 more than what he ended this season. And if Cal Raleigh played all of his games at Yankee Stadium, he would have ended the season with 48 home runs. What does that kind of tell you here?
Honestly, like I don't even know how this is the conversation. Like I get why, but like if it's just the home runs, it shouldn't be a conversation. I've been saying it all season.
Right. And
that's awful.
Even the home runs being just the conversation, I think you got to look more into those home runs, kind of dive into when the home runs were hit, how effective were the home runs. This is, a lot of people are saying this is a most valuable player. I think a great way to tell how valuable a player is when they hit their home runs, not necessarily how far. Cal Raleigh, low leverage situations, has hit 30 home runs. Medium leverage, he hit 20, and in high leverage, he hit 10. So a majority of his home runs came in low leverage situations, and it slowly dips as you get to the high leverage situations, having only 10. And then Judge, in low leverage situations, this is really weird, only had 8 home runs. In medium leverage, had 30, and in high leverage, had 14. So if this truly is an argument about value, how do you really dispute that Aaron Judge is the MVP?
Everybody knew Aaron Judge was going to be the MVP going into this year. The Yankees are built around Aaron Judge. Cal Raleigh is kind of this guy that I don't want to say came out of nowhere, but I don't think anybody saw him hitting 60 home runs this year, even 50, if we're being completely honest. That's how you know. And first of all, you could just look at the WAR. Like that's literally how you can determine who's valuable. But it's kind of just like Aaron Judge is the most valuable player on this Yankees team, and he looked like the best player in the league all season. And Cal Raleigh was just kind of hitting home runs. That's
Yeah.
about it.
That's pretty much about all Cal Raleigh did. And I think you really saw it in those last 2 months from August 1st till the end of the season. He batted 224 with a 352 on base percentage, only he hit 18 home runs, the most in Major League Baseball in that span. But everything else was not good, 224 average, a 352 on base. I think the OPS was just shy of 900, which still isn't a bad OPS by any standards. But I think you have to admit that towards the end of the season, Cal Raleigh was just selling out for home runs.
Yeah.
Because Aaron Judge in that same span hit 305, had 50 hits, 16 home runs, 29 RBIs across his final 49 games. And I think that's much more valuable than what Cal Raleigh did, especially when you pair that with the leverage situations he was hitting these home runs in. So we got game 2 tonight. How we feeling?
Nervous because I have to watch it with 2 Red Sox fans.
Matt,
But his roommate Jack, they were at the game last night. Actually,
of course. They were.
Yeah. So nervous because Matt, as I know Landon knows, is a big trash talker.
Yeah.
I actually have class with him in about 30 minutes, so that should be fun. I haven't talked to him since the game last night. But I'm feeling nervous. Bayo hurts the Yankees. He always does.
I have the stats here. Rodon, first of all, does not pitch well against the Red Sox. Has an ERA of 4.28, a record of 5-6, 75 strikeouts in his 12 career starts against the Red Sox. And then when you pair that with his postseason numbers, I feel like the narrative gets really scary for the Yankees. A 1-3 record with an ERA of 6.64, 28 strikeouts in 6 appearances in the postseason. So not great numbers from Rodon there. And as you mentioned, Bayo is really good against the Yankees. Obviously hasn't pitched in the postseason yet, but his numbers against the Yankees alone should scare them. A record of 5-4, an ERA of 2.35, and 53 strikeouts in his 11 starts against the Yankees. I personally think the key to winning for the Yankees is you have to be aggressive. You have to take advantage over the fact that Bayo is more of a contact pitcher, not necessarily a strikeout arm, only having 124 strikeouts over 166.2 innings. That's not that great when you look at all the other strikeout arms in the league. They have strikeout numbers approaching 200 or well over 200, like in the case of Skeens and Schoolball. Um, you know, we talked about it very early on in the show. You got to learn how to adjust. They had the right mindset going into it. Attack early, which I think should be the mindset going into it tonight. Attack early, try and get on base with someone that's more of a contact arm. And in Yankee Stadium, not necessarily a good matchup for Bayo. But when you look at the numbers, it makes you take a step back and think that maybe Bayo knows how to pitch in Yankee Stadium better than most. Um, you know, it's the adjustments are going to be key for the Yankees tonight. You could go out there and be aggressive, but once he sees you're aggressive and he adjusts, like Crochet did last night, you got to adjust right back. It can't just be we're going in with one game plan and one game plan only. Christian, anything you want to add before we wrap things up here?
Yeah, just I kind of wanted to say how I think a big key tonight is a fire that's going to be lit under all of the Yankees, but especially Stanton, who didn't perform well last night, and really Jazz and Ben Rice. Jazz is clearly upset about last night not playing. He said that Aaron Boone texted him. Boone didn't even have the heart to call him, telling him he wasn't starting their biggest game of the season. I think that led to just huge fire under Jazz, and I think Ben Rice is going to have something too. I think all three of them are going to perform well tonight. Hopefully, lead us to a Yankees victory.
Yeah, and then obviously tomorrow you have the rookie Cam Schlittler in a possible Game 3 matchup. Thank you so much, Christian, for taking the time to come on. Take a listen to his podcast, Beyond the Bench. Is there anything you want to say about Beyond the Bench?
No, we're on Spotify and YouTube, and thanks for having me, Landon. I was so happy to do this. I love doing this.
All right. Thank you guys so much. Christian, I'm gonna hang up here. Have a good rest of your day, buddy. See
Thank
you
you. You
soon.
too.
All right.
See you.
So, a pretty successful show, if you ask me. The Yankees have a lot to prove tonight. Jackson Dart has to continue proving he's the guy for the Giants. Aaron Glenn, he's got to prove that he can make a difference for the New York Jets. From WIUR, I'm Landon Popovic, signing off.